Dickinson is one of the most famous poets ever. Personally, from my perspective, I think she's one of the most famous ones. And if you look her name up on like bookstores, you'll find 100 books of collections of her poetry. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend getting. If you're new to poetry, I think starting with Emily Dickinson would be a great start. So next, I want to talk about contemporary poetry, which means poetry of today's world, basically. So if you noticed, when you think of contemporary poets that are now famous, they always share their works on Instagram, and they're mostly famous. You start knowing them from Instagram, not from their books, because in today's society, technology has been controlling us, basically. So everything we do is on social media. Everything we do is related somehow to technology. So with the advancement of technology, poetry evolved, and micro poetry became a thing. So a micro poem is a short poem of no more than 100 words and 2 verses. People on social media, they don't want to read something for hours. When you're reading a book, yeah, some might even read a book for a full day. So you want something that's like a minute or like 2 minutes and then go to the next post. So micro poem makes things short and easy to read. So it attracts people, and a lot of poets, though they have very long poems in their books, on their social media, they just include micro poetry. And in poetry these days, before you had to make poetry formal, and but now it's okay to use informal and in conversation style. Also, contemporary poets are more fearless than poets in the past. Contemporary poets now talk about very controversial subjects, and they're not afraid of like what the public will think of them. So I wrote a micro poem as part of one of my projects, and I want to read it out for you guys. It's very short. The moon can't shine without the sun, and I can't live without you. So this is an example of a micro poem. If you look at it, you can read it in 1 second without even having to read it. Your mind will, just take it in. So that's the thing about micro poetry. And someone is asking if it should rhyme, and no, poetry doesn't have to rhyme. It could, but it sounds better to some when it's rhyming, but it's all about expressing yourself and your emotions. So the newest way of poetry is spoken word. Spoken word poetry mostly rhymes, but there are spoken word poetry that doesn't. So it's performance poetry, and poets focus on expressing their emotions through their voice. So it's kind of like acting. Some even don't act. Some are really emotional when they read out a poetry loud, because it's very personal. But spoken word, despite it being spoken word, it always starts with writing. Because like if you're doing a play, if you're performing, you have to have a script. So it starts with the writing, but the process is different than normal writing, because when you write a spoken word, you write it to sound well. So when you're writing, you're thinking, okay, how will it sound when I actually perform it? So spoken word started in the 1960s and evolved during the civil rights movement. I don't know if you guys know Martin Luther King Jr. He basically wrote the most notable speeches. I Have a Dream, and this speech influenced spoken word culture. So in the next slide, I'm gonna show you one of my favorite poets. I have 2 of her books. I'll give you, if you guys are interested in like poetry books, talk to me later after the workshop, and I can share with you one of my favorite books. But anyway, so I'm gonna play a video of a spoken word poem by Sarah Kay. It's called If I Have a Daughter, I think.
If I should have a daughter, instead of mom, she's gonna call me Point B. Because that way she knows that no matter what happens, at least she can always find her way to me. And I'm gonna paint the solar systems on the backs of her hands, So she has to learn the entire universe before she can say, oh, I know that like the back of my hand. And she's gonna learn that this life will hit you hard, in the face, wait for you to get back up just so it can kick you in the stomach. But getting the wind knocked out of you is the only way to remind your lungs how much they like the taste of air. There is hurt here that cannot be fixed by Band-Aids or poetry. So the first time she realizes that Wonder Woman isn't coming, I'll make sure she knows she doesn't have to wear the cape all by herself. Because no matter how wide you stretch your fingers, your hands will always be too small to catch all the pain you want to heal. Believe me, I've tried. And baby, I'll tell her, don't keep your nose up in the air like that. I know that trick. I've done it a million times. You're just smelling for smoke, so you can follow the trail back to a burning house so you can find the boy who lost everything in the fire to see if you can save him. Or else, find the boy who lit the fire in the first place to see if you can change him. But I know she will anyway, so instead, I'll always keep an extra supply of chocolate and rain boots nearby, because there is no heartbreak that chocolate can't fix. Okay, there's a few heartbreaks that chocolate can't fix, but that's what the rain boots are for, because rain will wash away everything if you let it. I want her to look at the world through the underside of a glass-bottom boat, to look through a microscope at the galaxies that exist on the pinpoint of a human mind, because that's the way my mom taught me, that there'll be days like this, there'll be days like this, my mama said, when you open your hands to catch and wind up with only blisters and bruises. When you step out of the phone booth and try to fly, and the very people you want to save are the ones standing on your cape. When your boots will fill with rain and you'll be up to your knees in disappointment, and those are the very days you have all the more reason to say thank you. Because there's nothing more beautiful than the way the ocean refuses to stop kissing the shoreline, no matter how many times it's sent away. You will put the wind in winsome, lose some. You will put the star in starting over, and no matter how many landmines erupt in a minute, be sure your mind lands on the beauty of this funny place called life. And yes, on a scale from 1 to over-trusting, I am pretty damn naive, but I want her to know that this world is made out of sugar. It can crumble so easily, but don't be afraid to stick your tongue out and taste it. Baby, I'll tell her, remember your mama is a worrier and your papa is a warrior, and you are the girl with small hands and big eyes who never stops asking for more. Remember that good things come in threes, and so do bad things, and always apologize when you've done something wrong, but don't you ever apologize for the way your eyes refuse to stop shining. Your voice is small, but don't ever stop singing. And when they finally hand you heartache, when they slip war and hatred under your door and offer you handouts on street corners of cynicism and defeat, you tell them that they really ought to meet your mother.
So obviously spoken word really needs a lot of courage. It's something I would never do, to be honest. But yeah, it is very emotional. And I feel like it's emotional because she did try to, she used emotion to make us feel her feelings. But yeah, she has really good poetry and she's one of my favorite. And she has a book about this certain spoken word poetry. It's printed with like illustrations. It's very beautiful. So spoken word, it can rhyme. Some of it shouldn't rhyme. Like you can do whatever you want, but most importantly, you can all, no, not you can, you all should focus on emotions. If you search spoken poetry on YouTube, you'll find that a lot of people use music in the background, and some even like act. There's like music videos of spoken word poetry. It's really interesting. But yeah, so the next thing I'll talk about is finding your voice. And when I say finding your voice, not your speaking voice, it's your style in writing, yourself, finding yourself basically. So when writing, you should think of the reason and why you want to write. The reason you write, why you want to write, and your purpose really affects the outcome of the poem. So why you write will greatly affect the people, the type of people that will be reading, and once you know who you are trying to reach, finding your voice will be much easier. Also, having a purpose. Where are you going with this? What are you trying to say? And there are two types of destinations for poems. Poems written to express feelings and poems written to make a connection. So one is a reflective type of poetry, another is an observation. So reflective type, mostly people write it to, if you're feeling some type of emotion and you want to get things out on paper, even on digitally, like on laptop or on your notes, it will be considered a reflective type of poetry. And poems written to make a connection, which is observational poetry, it's the poems you write to make people feel something. So be the mirror, reflect, writing to express emotions. This is the first type. So you put your emotions into words, then paper, and all you have to do is express what you're feeling. To some, it could be like therapy. So this poem right here is one I wrote when I was feeling emotional about like the past, because everyone, I feel like most people, when you think about the past, you feel very emotional and nostalgic. So I'm gonna read it for you because I feel like no one would read. I yearn for days that are forgotten, with memories that fade after being written, a past that hurts deep within, and people I can't win. Lost in a maze of thoughts, and I am still left with vague memories and a sin. So I wrote this a few years ago. Before, I used to prefer rhyming in my poems, but I feel like now I'm more into just focusing a lot on the imagery and the just very descriptive rather than rhyming. So the second type is the observational type. So it's writing to attract people emotionally. If your aim is to connect with your readers, your writing is considered observational. The writer's goal is to stir specific emotion or thought within the reader. And it usually addresses cultural and social issues as well as political issues. So here it can also talk about not very serious issues. I can write a poem about love and it's not something I feel, but I write it with the aim of making people feel this emotion. This is also okay, and this is observational. So finding your voice, how do you find your voice and your style? Obviously, you need to do that with time and with practice. You have to always write, have a notebook with you all the time. Whenever you're in the mood to write, just get a pencil. Even personally for me, I like to write when I'm on my phone, because if I think of something, I go to my notes and write something down. So you can do that. So the more you do, the more practice you get, the more experience you get. And obviously, you need to practice your grammar, you need to expand your vocabulary, but at the same time, vocabulary, it doesn't have to be very professional, because in the end, you're not writing a research paper, it's a poem, and you want everyone to understand and everyone to like get what you're saying. So, and also using very high, like some people use synonyms, or like they would go find synonyms. People do that for research papers, yeah, but you don't want to use something you're not comfortable with, because when you're not comfortable with a word and you use it in your poem, it can show, and it's kind of obvious. So the most important thing is being comfortable with your voice, comfortable with your style. And if you are interested in expanding your vocabulary, you do that by reading more books, not by looking up words. That's not the best option. Also, remember to not rush and enjoy the process of writing. I want to talk from my experience. So I stopped writing for a year because I wasn't inspired and I didn't want to force myself just for the sake of writing, because I knew if I forced myself, I might hate the process and I might hate writing. So I was being very patient and I just waited to get inspiration again. So everything in life, every profession has tools that will help you become a better at whatever thing you're doing. So poetry too, it has tools that you should focus on to improve yourself, like themes, images, metaphors, similes, and punctuation. These things we learned in school, but you have to kind of revise just to make sure you remember everything. So the punctuation that's most important in poetry is commas, semicolons, and colons. So semicolons are the ones, the dot and then comment. I don't know how to describe them really. I should have included how they look like, but I'm sure most of you guys know. And colons are the two dots, the commas are the commas. So semicolons are used when you're talking about two independent sentences, but they're related. So instead of stopping it with a full stop because it's very related, you want them to be one sentence, you separate it with a semicolons. And a comma is when you're listing stuff. And to list stuff, you start mostly by colons. So these are very important because they change how people read the poem. So we have to know these punctuation. So similes is a comparison of one object to another by the words like and as, and it gives object life. So this is an example that was included in the book. Looking at the glittering sky, I felt my soul take flight, wings spread wide like black magpie. And here is the simile. Black magpie is a type of bird. So this gives the object more life. So metaphors too are like similes because they compare two objects, but doesn't directly using the words is and are. As this example too is from the book. War is a broken vase capable of being filled. So remember when I mentioned contemporary poetry, Instagram, social media? In order to succeed in, as a poet, you need to think of images and themes. And when I say images and themes, it's clear the visual of the poetry. So you have to attract people with your posts, edit or draw an illustration, anything, to make it more attractive on social media and make people want to repost it and share it with other people. A lot of artists do that these days. So I'm going to show you my examples, and I'm not the perfect example because I tend to focus a lot on the aesthetic, not very much on if it's readable, because I care a lot about art. I'm an art major, so I focus on that mostly. So I did this for one of my projects, and I did a digital edit and included my painting in the middle and then the poem. So this is one way to do it. And then I knew that this wasn't so clear, so I then did another one. I wrote this with my handwriting, edited it on Photoshop, and included a Polaroid to make it look, a bit artistic. This could be, you can make it very simple. I did this using my typewriter and just on a piece of paper. So you really have to go too much. You can just do that and it looks, it's better than just typing something out. And this example is done by one of my friends. I like it because it's simple, yet very attractive. The colors here utilized are very nice. And she used it, I think she did it using Procreate. She drew stars and then she hand wrote her poem. So that also is a type of way you can do your poetry. And also I did this for one of my projects. I wrote the poem on a typewriter, glued it on the envelope and painted. So this is the images, and then the themes. When talking about themes, it could be a visual theme, but mostly also poetic theme. So I can, for example, write 5 poems about flowers and they're all related, and that's the theme. So these are the images and themes of poetry, and they can be connected through the design and how you show it. So it's very important in today's world to do that, because you want to attract people. You want, you're writing, if you're sharing on social media, you're writing because you want to reach a number of people and make your poetry, do something. If your goal is to help people maybe through poetry, that's important. So the activity I want to do with you guys is blackout poetry. I thought about a lot of activities, but I felt like this is, I guess, something you can finish, in 10 minutes, because we have 10 minutes left. So I want you guys to get anything that's like a magazine, newspaper, a book, and start doing this. I don't know if you know, but you just make a poem by canceling out words with a black marker. I'm looking forward to reading your stuff. So thank you everyone for joining, and I hope this was beneficial. I hope you learned something. And if you guys have anything you want to ask, you can always talk to me on Instagram.